Oh God. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay. Alright. Alright. I made it. I finally lost that donkey. The mob, and reached Seattle. What was I supposed to do here again? Oh, Jesus Christ. You just give me a break.
You think you can escape your fate, but you are mistaken, as your fate belongs in the deep, dark depths of prison. Fuck!
Take that, bitch! You stupid fucks coming in for this last minute gotcha, but you're the one who got gotcha'd.
No, you fucking idiot, we were trying to save you! As you've undoubtedly noticed, these domes destroy anything contained within it. And we can't let that happen to you, or else the show ends and we lose our source of income. So we pinpointed the exact location on this planet where none of these domes would fall, and it was in Brazil.
You do know I don't get paid for this. Okay, fine. Assuming that is your reasoning, what's so wrong with this place?
Well, besides the fact that a dome will capture you eventually, you brought yourself to the worst possible area you could bring yourself. Because you're about to be infected with the virus from the series, with the virus, with the zombies, and the virus.
A virus, huh? Ah, that can't be anything. Well, I can't do my little piece here with all this noise, so let's drown it out with some fun music. Yeah, some fun music. Maybe I should have listened to that stupid ass.
Smash Brandy's cooch. Shooch.
I didn't get into this series until the beginning of 2021. Let that be the general tone setter for today's episode of Controversy, where we are set to take a look at one of the most volatile game controversies in recent memory. I did not come into this as a long-time fan. I was there when the first game came out on the PS3, and the buzz lasted well into the beginning of my last year of high school, and all my buddies were so interested in this newfangled whatchamacallit. And yet, despite one of them actually owning a PS3, which was the only way I would have been able to play it, they didn't get it, and thus, I never touched it. GTA 5 though? Oh, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I didn't play that thing until 2021 either. There was also the whole being a Nintendo fan who wouldn't dare sully their games library with an enemy combatant phase I was still stuck in at that time, but regardless, I was only a witness to The Last of Us and the events that followed, the wild praise it received from critics and audiences, the unsung naysayers calling it overrated and dumb, and every little step Naughty Dog has made since. Then the sequel arrived in 2020, and it let loose all the messy shit we're gonna be sorting through today. But even during that time, I still remained a simple witness. I just relegated that stuff to a brief mention during that year's wrap-up video. But truth be told, I was wanting to get to this video way before I finally did. Like, I had acquired a modern Sony console of my very own at the end of that year, all to prep for the inevitable 5-hour video covering the whole fiasco. But that didn't happen, and I chose to remain a witness. Now, I'm sure you all can understand why this took so long to bring together, but I was mainly hoping for time to distance these controversies from this franchise to make any further discussion of it just a smidge less hectic, less toxic, less annoying. So, it's been nearly 3 years. The HBO adaptation of the first game was recently broadcasted to the world on a dying streaming platform, and the newest remaster of that very game is now available on PCs. I don't think it's nearly enough time, but fuck it, we're not getting any younger here over at the Crazy Even HQ, so I put my ass to work on this, employing all the standard research methods and Wikipedia scrolling I often do when scripting out these videos, as well as attempting to find a way to contextualize it in a manner that will give me the insight into these events that I've been struggling to obtain for years. And yet never have I done this, and still felt like nothing more than a witness, an outsider, someone who doesn't feel like they have a grasp of the full picture. Been a real frustrating time. But you know, witnesses can bring in their own perspectives, and it's not like these words are going to be the damning kind of expose that'll put me in some random suburban house with my wife and 2 kids for my own protection. So let's finally engage with this near-decade-long series of controversies and try to determine where they stand in the throngs of video game history. Maybe, by the end of this discussion, I won't feel so much like a witness. Instead, I'll feel like a blue-pilled cuck, or a beta soy boy, or a wokeified libtard, or a fingled mockenborker, or whatever's the trendy insult these days. Hold on, I need to take my medicine. Gah. Now, this isn't helping. The Last of Us comes to us from the folks at Naughty Dog, a mainstay first-party Sony developer since they were happily married in the early 2000s, and one of their most reliable ones too, as those Crashes and Jaxes and Nathan Drakeses made them a boatload of money. Development for the game started following the wrap-up for the second Uncharted game, which saw the company split their workforce into 2 separate teams, so one could work on the next Uncharted game, and the other on this new project. This new team would be led by 2 of the company's more prominent members, Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann, both of whom had worked on much of the Jaxes and Uncharted's, so they were given more than enough trust to act as the gameplay director and director for whatever this was gonna be. And there was much deliberation as to what it was gonna be. They even considered a new Jak and Daxter game. They would eventually settle on an old concept that Druckmann had come up with during his college years, which, as they described it, was like Eco set in a zombie apocalypse. This concept took shape in many different forms over the next year as ideas were brought in and scrapped left and right, but the result of all this brainstorming would be the game we all know as The Last of Us. It was to be set in the aftermath of the aforementioned zombie apocalypse thanks to a big old fungal infection that turned everyone into raving psychopathic zombies and featured 2 main characters, those being Joel Last of Us, a jaded middle-aged smuggler who lost his daughter at the very start of the catastrophe, and Ellie Last of Us, a tough teenage girl who is the person Joel is smuggling. We would get to see their amazing journey across a desecrated USA as they fight those zombos and non-zombos to learn how they can truly become not just The Last of Us, but the last of themselves. Once development took hold, the Sony Naughty Dog hype cycle started up too, with a slew of trailers showcasing the game pumped out through 2012, followed by several promo pieces on news sites and game magazines covering it to build that hype up even further. A big exclusive on a Sony console was always going to get a lot of press and hype, but I was still surprised with just how much of that it received when looking into it, especially with this trailer. No, not that one. No, not that one. There you go. As for how the rest of the actual development went, there didn't appear to be any major hurdles beyond the initial conception phase, besides a delay to fix up as many issues as possible. You can see for yourself how proud they are with the game in this little making of documentary, Grounded, which I honestly recommend to anyone interested. Also, this is the introductory line.
Yeah, making the new IP is, how can I put it? It's just don't do it.
I just found that funny for some reason. With all that Naughty Dog gusto and Sony money, they planted The Last of Us into store shelves and thus into the hands of those sexy PS3 owners on June 14th, 2013. And how did this glorious swan song for this console perform with all the hype behind it? Well, it became the second highest reviewed Naughty Dog game ever, second highest reviewed game of 2013, and sold 8 million copies within a year. So yeah, I guess it did pretty well. You could argue it was a flop though, if you wanted to. Like, only 8 million in a year? Like, it could have sold 20 million if Sony had truly been confident in it. No, instead it just took a pathetic 6 years to reach that point. Lame, lame, lame. So despite the game being an innate failure of unseen proportions, it may come as some surprise that it got entangled with some controversies of some sort. Like, I'm not just including the first game here to further stall from talking about the main event. These aren't quite as juicy as those are, but they are interesting nonetheless, so let's start with the most upfront one. Now, I don't know about you, but this doesn't seem like a very provocative cover, does it? Well, try casting your minds back to 2013 and envision what the gaming atmosphere was like in those days. Do you see the problem now? No? Yeah, neither do I, but there was still a bit of a fuss about it related to another game existing in the same hyposphere that The Last of Us had occupied, BioShock Infinite. Yes, the true sky-high prequel to the original 2007 title that Ken Levine had actually had his hands in, and before his reputation ironically plummeted. Its box art was revealed towards the end of 2012, and some folks thought its man-with-gun approach was a little bland and not representative of the game as a whole, as in addition to man-with-gun, it featured a very prominent female with multiverse-ripping powers, all set in a big racist world in the sky. Yeah, it's a pretty weird game. Those aspects were shown on the back cover, and there were alternate covers included with the main game, but it wasn't enough to prevent a brief debate over front covers. In response, Mr. Levine stated that this singular cover had been chosen to appeal to the casual, uninformed consumer, after they had gotten a bunch of feedback from people who hadn't heard of BioShock and weren't as online as some folks can be. You could interpret that as them wanting to appeal to the common man, or whoever in marketing was in charge of this part got lazy, but this approach clearly worked out for them as the game would go on to sell 11 million copies within 2 years of release. Hot damn. However, even though this game had also been an innate failure of unseen proportions, The Last of Us crew were stuck in a similar dilemma as, according to them, they'd been asked by marketing higher-ups to push Ellie Lou there to the back cover so Joe Lou could have all the spotlight. Partly fueled by the whole BioShock Infinite debacle, the production team weren't having any of that and wrote a swift response standing by that cover, thus stonewalling those pesky marketing moguls from having a chance at fucking up their hard work ever again. I mean, they already had to change Ellie herself because she originally looked a little bit too much like pre-transition Elliot Page, who was already set to star and used their likeness in a different game, and so he had publicly called Naughty Dog out on it. Thankfully, there wasn't any strife between the two, and Elliot Page would go on to see success with their own title. Clearly, this worked out for him in the long run. As for one more little incident that happened right after the game's release, Naughty Dog were hit with another accusation of plagiarizing someone's likeness, and by likeness I mean Map of Boston. This map specifically, from map artist Cameron Booth. That very same day though, Naughty Dog reached out to the man and acknowledged their error, as it was very likely they had mistook his work for an official government map, and the two came to a mutual agreement. Of some kind. Like I said, it's not quite as juicy. But of course, what would a discussion of controversy be without a little bit of censorship? As the European versions of the game removed gore and dismemberment in the multiplayer, and the Japanese version removed gore and dismemberment in the entire game. Whoopee. And yeah, that's about as far as the first game's controversies go. I mean, I could talk about my feelings about the game itself, because I have played it, and I do have a lot of thoughts on it. Like, I have thoughts about the Joel Lou, and thoughts about the Ellie Lou. I have thoughts about the fun moment-to-moment gameplay. I have thoughts about how violent it indeed was. Thoughts about the pretty shaky AI. Thoughts about that ending, which took me a good bit to come around on, and I could even discuss my thoughts on how what I believe the best parts of the game for me were exploring the desolate locations of real-life cities and finding those little stories within, but I don't feel this is the right place for that. Besides, that's not where the messy stuff lay. I promised y'all a mess, so let's get into the slimy, spore-riddled thick of that mess. Following the game's Left Behind DLC and the aforementioned remaster, Naughty Dog had immediately started development on a sequel, which was to be titled The Last of Us Part 2. You get it, right? You get it? The Druckmann and Straley tag team weren't able to work on it for a good bit, as they were a little preoccupied with a different game, but once that was settled, they went all in with this sequel. Or at least Druckmann had. Oh, look at that, what a beautiful little seed. The team was finally able to use the awesome power of the PS4 to make this sequel even larger, prettier, intenser, and depressinger than the first game. And this time Druckmann would share writing duties with one Hallie Gross, who had previously worked on big Hollywood TV shows like Westworld and Too Young to Die. As the development progressed over the years and the fancy trailers dropped, the hype cycle had indeed risen up once again. And it's with one of these trailers where we can start talking about this game's larger list of controversies. No, not that one. No, not that one. There we go. This was shown during the PlayStation Expo at Paris Games Week. And, well, it's clear they're not fucking around here either, but this whole sequence was just a bit much for some, especially considering this was the last trailer shown during that expo. If y'all can't understand why folks wouldn't feel so great about this and feel the urge to call them a soy latte, do also keep in mind that these were brand new characters being introduced into the Lastiverse, and this is how they were introduced. Bit of a weird choice on Naughty Dog's part is all I'm saying. Like, imagine if one of the first game's trailers was Joel just killing those two random guys. Or for a different example, imagine if Rockstar had put out a trailer for GTA 5 that introduced Trevor by him curb stomping Johnny Klebitz. I did warn y'all there would be spoilers. Outside of that though, things did appear to be moving slowly but smoothly, and in late 2019, Sony announced during one of their many State of Play events that the game had a set release date for February 21st, 2020, which was then pushed back further into the following year so that the team could polish out the rest of the game during those early months of 2020. Oh dear. Now, a single delay was not going to signify doom of any sort for a game or its developer, but this thing had been in the oven for quite a lot of time. That first trailer dropped in late 2016, and this delay did get some folks wondering if everything was okay there over at Naughty Dog HQ. And during those early months of 2020, we learned that their foundation had been a little shaky over the years. Indeed, something had been brewing under their surface for so long. Something that to this day is used to justify any scorn thrown in their direction. And what that ended up being was a poor work culture. Oh wow, look at that seed. It's growing into a beautiful baby boy. Thanks to the one and only Jason Schreier, we learned in detail about the company's own multi-year-long history with the omnipresent ghoul of game development, crunch. It all goes back to those initial stages of the Lu Part 2's development, as Naughty Dog had grown even larger in size compared to the start of that decade, and while a fair amount of them would be working on that game, the rest of them were still in the middle of working on the fourth Uncharted title, including Straley and Druckmann. Compared to The Last of Us, though, the Uncharted 4 development cycle was noticeably bumpier, as those two had taken the reins as director and gameplay director once again, following the departure of this game's director-writer tag team, Justin Richmond and Amy Hennig. There was also a report during this time that those two were actually forced out of Naughty Dog by these two so that they could have full control over the game, and this was later confirmed when the game came out and players saw that they had added the worst possible thing that any video game could ever have. A black woman, voiced by Laura Bailey.
You have something I want, and you're going to give it to me. Really? Well, I'm flattered, but I'm afraid I'm spoken for.
Oh no! Oh, the horrors! Shockingly, everyone involved denied these reports, and that report was later rescinded. While there did seem to be some creative differences with the direction of the plot according to this interview Hennig would later give, I think some folks end up reading in between the lines a bit too much for what ended up being in the final game. Whatever the case was, Team Struckman had their work cut out for them. Thankfully, the big Naughty Dog Club was large enough to help mitigate any potential work culture issues, and they were able to get it completed in just 2 years. It appears that things had smoothed out pretty well during that period too, as there had been only 70% of their non-lead designers who had left the company following the game's completion, including Straley. Oh, God, this thing fucking stinks. Holy shit! Oh! Straley would state in his own interview that this departure had been due to burnout, and looking over the level of crunch the team had experienced during this time, it's not hard to see why you'd feel that way. Once again, we have another never-ending cycle of being at the office well after closing hours for days on end, trying not to lose your mind when shit like discarding weeks of material and clashes between multiple divisions is prevalent in that big Naughty Dog building. It sounded like hell for them, for those working on the standalone expansion that followed, and a special kind of hell for those who may have actually been let go as a result of a certain movement within the entertainment industry, of which we have details for one in particular. Yes, Naughty Dog's work culture problems were not simply a matter of terrible crunch. We also got the classic sexual harassment allegations, as in late 2017, one David Ballard posted a series of Twitter tweets accusing an unnamed Naughty Dog lead of sexual harassment over the course of a few months during his time there as an environmental artist. According to him, when he had gone to HR to report those troublesome antics, he got booted from the company, and they also attempted to get him to sign an agreement about these events worth 20 grand, but he refused to do so, and that was that, until those tweets. The company swiftly responded to these accusations, stating they take allegations of this nature very seriously, but hadn't found any evidence backing up Ballard's tweets. So later into the next year, Ballard just went and name-dropped the bastard. Mr. Robert Cogburn, who had worked as a game designer for the Uncharted series starting with 2, and ended up being the lead multiplayer designer for the last games in the franchise. Ballard also accused one of the former co-presidents, Christoph Balestra,
Don't do it.
of backing Cogburn up, which would eventually lead to that firing. Unfortunately, that's where the information had stopped on his end, but luckily we have good old LinkedIn to show us that Mr. Cockburn had left ND sometime during the start of that year. Whether or not he had been booted as a result of those initial tweets is completely up in the air, but either way, not a great look for Naughty Dog, and I wouldn't be surprised if this hadn't been the last case of that. At this point though, Druckmann and crew were just hoping to push forward with The Last of Us Part 2 by pulling in every member of the 350-person Naughty Dog team to focus on it, while mitigating any further crunch from ever happening during that process. Yeah, and I was hoping that this video could get finished much sooner than it actually did, but we can't always get what we want now, can we? At least I haven't lost more than half of my workforce thanks to the terrible experiences developing those last 2 games, and now have to utilize a whole bunch of newbies that are being thrown into this dumpster fire. I only lost my skin. Sadly, any hopes for Druckmann and crew to prevent the cycle of crunch from repeating were dashed away shortly into development. It started out fine enough, as it usually does, but following tepid feedback from testers as well as that E3 2018 presentation, the team entered another cycle of endless reiterations and revisions that brought the crunch back in full force. Those Naughty Dogs were staying at the office well into the night again, all to keep up with their endless workloads and help other folks with their endless workloads, because this was going to be their biggest game yet, so anything less than their most exhausted, burnt-out, disoriented selves scraping through another long-winded project would not do. Worse, as was mentioned in this article and that Grounded documentary, their corporate structure was very lax in that they basically have no corporate structure. They all work as one big happy family and only report to the directors or presidents. Everyone is their own producer, meaning Everyone has to be there as much as possible, because if someone isn't there to do this specific thing at this specific point in time, it throws a hitch into the workload and fucks everything up. And this is where I started noticing some familiar themes. Endless crunch for multiple games, a heavily disorganized production team, a sexual harassment claim? Oh no! I thought you were dead! Yes, and reading up on this situation, I was very much reminded of Rockstar's own situation, which I had covered at the end of the Rockstar saga. And this is probably the worst way one would ever want to be compared with Rockstar. The key difference here, though, is that Rockstar actually did have a multitude of producers for their multiple locations, and crunch was somewhat mitigated over time. Not enough to stop Schreier from making an article about their own troubles, but, well, let me just say that I'm sure letting those Naughty Dog members run wild and free with their ideas is a nice feeling at first. Probably not so much when 350 people are left to their own devices, and there's all that fucking turnover with the new employees getting thwacked in the guns just trying to catch up. True, not all of the developers had to work these long hours. Hell, none of them had to work these long hours. And some even said they had enjoyed working these long hours. But it got to a point where the stability of the game's development was held together through this crunch. Even a full year after several outsourced studios had finally gotten involved to help finish the fucking thing, and the game's 3-month delay, it only kept going and going and going, and didn't stop going right up until the game's manufacturing date, which was already pushed back a few weeks further because of bug fixes. I really should not be surprised by crunch stories like this anymore, but my god, what could make this shit cycle go even more haywire? Oh. As you may be able to recall, the COVID-19 pandemic had hit its initial peak worldwide barely 3 months into the year, and the state of California, which is where Naughty Dog is based at, had been subsequently hit with a stay-at-home order, and thus all of these Naughty Dog members were not going to be able to ride out the rest of their crunch fest within the comfort of their work desks. Nope, it had to be in the comfort and safety of their own homes. As a result, the game was hit with another delay, and an indefinite one at that. Thankfully, it had mostly been completed at that time, so if anything, the stay-at-home order did them a bit of a favor by finally giving them some sort of fucking break. Thank you, Mr. Newsom, you saved the world. At the very least, it seemed like this was going to be as bad as it was ever going to get for Naughty Dog and crew. Oh god, no, this is not making the smell any better. Oh, holy fuck, that stench. Oh wait, that's just me. Towards the end of that month, a humble little Reset Era post went around the blog boasting about a humble little leak for the Loo Part 2, derived from an hour-long leak of gameplay and cutscenes uploaded to youtube.com that spoiled a massive chunk of the game's story. This wasn't the first leak of plot details and such pertaining to the game. As is described with this massive timeline of such leaks, 4chan had their own plot leak make the rounds across the internet just a few weeks before, most of it being fake as leaks tend to be. But this was the first instance of such that had actual undeniable footage to accompany those words and prove their legitimacy. And what undeniable footage it was. What sensational details about the plot contained within these videos. What a momentous affair for all gamers around the world to be able to take a glimpse into the sequel of what many consider the best game of all time. And what a colossal setback for Naughty Dog and crew who had worked their asses off 12 hours a day to be able to show the world their creation, only for it to be smeared upon by some self-righteous dick nibblers. If only they had paid that person a few more Naughty Dog dollars, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. Yeah, the theory going around how this leak came to be was that it had been the work of a disgruntled contractor who was in the middle of a pay dispute, or was upset about the crunch culture, or had their fucking dog blown up during the motion capture sessions. I'm not 100% sure where this claim originated from, but it was too much of a karmic turn of events to not catch on. Other folks disagreed with this theory and surmised it had been the result of hackers exploiting a security vulnerability with one of said hackers doing the dirty deed of uploading that shit to YouTube. And Sony would go on to do their own investigation, confirming that the leak had come from an outside party, and not an internal one. For as entertaining a scenario as the rumored one may have been, the more boring explanation is usually the more likely scenario. Also, Naughty Dog had actually provided better pay and benefits during the initial COVID pandemic. You starting to understand why this took so long to get together? Ultimately though, the source of the leak does not matter. What was in the leak and the reaction to that material did matter. And oh boy, what a reaction it was. On the professional end, the devs and pubs were not very pleased with the leak, nor were they pleased with the news sites reporting the leak, or anyone just trying to spread the details of the leak. So Sony immediately announced the game's final release date to try and distract people. That may have been good to know ahead of time, but that sadly didn't stop the world from learning about the new ongoing events in the lives of Ellie Lou and Joel Lou any more than they likely had. So they just started taking shit down. But it was also too late for that as well. Going through that Reset Era thread, responses went to both ends of the extreme pretty immediately. Plenty of, "This sounds fucking awesome!" to, "This sounds fucking terrible!" and multiple variations of each throughout. But reading through it, even beyond the final release, it actually remained kinda civil. Yeah, Reset Era, civil. Maybe the Reset Era Takes Twitter account really has been besmirching their name all these years. Once it started picking up speed outside there though, the conversation became far less civil. The takes were everywhere, all the hot takes, all the cold takes of a game that no one had played yet and had various opinions about. And there's a lot of very stupid shit I could bring up, but the more interesting discussion centered around the game's new character, Abby Last of Us. It was that one chick from the controversial trailer I touched on earlier. No, not that one. No, not that one.
I just fucking hate this world.
Okay, now you're just fucking with me. There we go.
Useless piece of shit.
And a very prominent figure within those leaked gameplay videos. Now, there are already a bunch of ironic memes featuring her, based on some of the more unflattering shots from the game, which, thinking about it, may have also been a way to get around the constant takedowns that Sony was performing at the time, but either way, there were various posts made mocking Abby's appearance as well, because, as is summed up by this particular tweet here, women don't actually look like her. There had also been some speculation that she was a transgender character, as the leaks had mentioned there was such a person who existed in the game, so I guess they put two and two together and that's how we got here. I can understand why they would think this though. I mean, it's a very commonly, scientifically, provenly, factly that not a single woman in the history of the world has ever looked like this, so obviously, she's a strong trans woman. I guess that just goes to show how deep the liberal invasion of the Naughty Dog minds goes. I mean, fucking Anita Sarkeesian had worked on the game. I mean, the credit is right there on Moby Games, right there on IMDb. These sites would never lie. Why shouldn't I believe the internet? Thanks to these leaks and the newfound ideas that the series had suddenly become another agenda-driven video game ruined by the woke mob of social justice warriors and their massive golf clubs, Lou Part 2 became the internet's punching bag for a good long while. But this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this game's controversies. First, while critical reviews could be put out a week before release, Sony plopped out another one of those strict embargoes preventing anyone from discussing the game's second half. As far as I know, it's not really that uncommon to see this embargo happen, but I can also understand if this had been tightened even further as a result of the leaks. Some folks did complain about it though, and yet despite that and everything that had happened up to that point, that 10 out of 10 started flying in. It wasn't quite to the extent of the first game, but still large enough to get that Metacritic score placed in the mid-90s, and eventually have it placed as the second highest reviewing game of that year. As one can imagine, the user reviews were not as kind, and upon release, there were thousands and thousands of reviews scoring it the complete opposite end of the critical scoring system, and the most common average going around being a good old 3.4 out of 10. This got so bad, Metacritic had to change their user review policy to prevent users from posting scores so soon after release. This isn't to say that critics and fans were at odds more than usual though, as there were some dissenting opinions on the professional side, especially in the pieces that went and reviewed the full game free from Sony's restrictions. Some felt the violence was too excessive this time around, the narrative too bleak this time around, and the game being too fucking long this time around as well. Vice's review by one Rob Zacny was particularly nasty in comparison to all the glowing praise elsewhere, so much so, a Sony representative reached out to them questioning it, even to the point of calling it unfair. A rather peculiar move considering the review was, at least in my eyes, perfectly valid, but Zacny explained his reasoning to the rep, and that appeared to satisfy them, so no further conflict ended up happening from either end. This was not the end for all press clashes though, as just before release, Jeff Kanata, a person known for a bunch of things I'm not very familiar with, posted his thoughts on the game in a tweet thread where he compared the game's quality to that of Schindler's list. He was immediately mocked for the comparison by many other fellows on Twitter, including Jason Schreier again, who just keeps showing up here for some bizarre reason. Druckmann took to social media himself to express his displeasure at those mocking the comparison, and this prompted further mocking and fellow industry folks to back him up. So I guess this is a good time as ever to mention the fact that Druckmann himself is not very well liked by some people. Primarily the same folk dragging The Last of Us through the mud for the reasons previously stated. From what I gather, a good chunk of this hatred was derived from the Uncharted 4 situation I mentioned earlier, the mention of Ernest Sarkeesian as an influence on his work during this interview, him being the perfect scapegoat for the crunch as he was the director of that game and thus perpetuated that cycle, him also being Israeli. Frankly, I have no strong feelings towards the man, but I think him getting the full brunt of this whole fiasco is utterly ridiculous, considering it was a collective failure. But to get back to the other polarizing figure in the games industry, Schreier also got in further trouble following the game's release after making a not-so-subtle jab at the game, prompting Joel's voice actor Troy Baker to quote-tweet him some quote from Teddy Roosevelt about how critics are worthless. And while they were bitching about this, Laura Bailey, who had voiced Abby, funnily enough, revealed that she had been receiving death threats as she had once again done the unforgivable thing known as doing her fucking job. And while that was happening, Japan had the violence in the game toned down again because reasons, and while that was happening, the game was banned from sale in the UAE and Saudi Arabia and other countries because other reasons, and while that was happening, Naughty Dog were accused of copying an acoustic cover of a New Order song for one of the trailers, and while that was happening, they started posting these uncanny meme gifs featuring the game's characters, and while that was happening, every single motherfucker on Earth put up an essay describing their extensive thoughts on the game, and while that was happening, Twitter user Cheeseburger replied to Naughty Dog's tweet celebrating the release of the game, calling them Naughty Dog shit, and while that was happening, the world was on fucking fire and everything was going fucking shit. What I'm about to say should not be taken lightly. And you may disagree with what I'm going to say, but I am going to say what needs to be said. Something needs to be said. And if I have to be the sole person on YouTube to finally bring up these concerns, then I will be that person. I will sacrifice myself for the greater gaming good. So you ready? You ready for my words? Here we go. I think this reaction was a little overblown. Phew, okay, I've been holding that one in for 3 fucking years, guys. Now my conscience can fully rest. But we're not done yet. The sequel to what many call one of the greatest video games of all time was always going to be a highly anticipated one and was always going to have all of the eyes on any proceedings regarding it. And just as it seemed like it was going to be released without any further troubles than there had already been, bam, Naughty Dog were hit with that Crunch article, and then bam, the leaks happened, and then bam, the review embargo, and then bam, pretentious statements, and then bam, all of that other shit. Most of these would be damaging enough by themselves, depending on your viewpoints, but All of these things happening at once on top of a real-life plague that the game wouldn't exactly distract its players from during these dire times. Well, this, folks, is what we in the business call a perfect storm of controversy. And if you were there to witness it all, it was either the most incredible time to be on this bitch of an internet, or the most obnoxious period of your internet life. For me, it was somewhere in between, because I hadn't played the game, so I didn't really have a whole lot of investment in... Okay, I can't lie, it was fucking obnoxious. Jesus fucking Christ. I got spoiled on it by a good chunk of my friends, salivating over this train wreck, as well as just social media doing their own goddamn stupid thing as they usually do. And yeah, I'll admit I did laugh at some of the memes, but I got sick of this whole affair in record time. Like, okay, I get it. Abby likes to play golf. Don't ask who Joel is. I get it. Shut up. That said, I don't think a lot of these reactions were really about the game, per se. There is something so fascinating about seeing such a well-regarded company getting absolutely decimated in this manner. Seemingly cathartic in some circumstances. So this was as golden an opportunity as ever to completely dunk on them, especially if you didn't like them to begin with. So I get the main mentality as to why the great clownification of Naughty Dog had become so prevalent. I don't agree with it, but I get it. But enough of these fellas for now. Let's touch on the people who were legitimately upset with the final game and its plot decisions. They exist. In actuality, from what I saw, there were similar complaints matching those of the more critical reviews that the game had received. It's too miserable, too long, too much doggy death. But while we can argue about this stuff all day long, that is not going to change what truly matters. Because regardless of how much shit a game is hit with, so long as it makes the big money, you know, the kind of big money that will allow Naughty Dog to shut down all the haters by going,
"Oi, you! Shut your mouth and look at my wad!"
I gotta hit myself.
Whoa!
They're probably gonna be just fine. So how well did the Lou of us, part of us, two of us do in the big old bitty old bing goom bing? Well, it sold half of what the original game had sold in a year within the first 3 fucking days, became the 6th highest selling game of 2020 in the States, and has since sold around 15 or so million copies to date. So, yep, another flop. I mean, if Sony was really that confident in it, it could have sold 15 billion! There's a little bit of a fallacy I've noticed with many controversies, and something that happened with, how to use a recent example, the Harry Potter game that came out. Because for as much of a stink as the internet had made over that game and other games for whatever reasons, there's a more significant amount of people who don't frequently use the internet, if at all, that will buy the games in droves for a number of their own reasons, and they're blissfully unaware of all the troubles behind it. Or they just don't care about them. I mentioned this when we were talking about appealing to the common gamer with BioShock Infinite, but to use another recent example, and one outside of video games, we saw that Avatar sequel film getting billions and billions in revenue from all across the world, and there's a slew of people online going, who the fuck's watching these movies? Who the fuck's filling these seats? I don't see anyone talking about them. Why are they so fucking popular? Well, normal everyday people from all over the world are going to see them. Families, children, general moviegoers, all sorts of people. They may not be talking about it online or in real life a whole lot, but believe it or not, they exist. Just because something that makes bank doesn't appear to be a cultural force doesn't mean that no one's watching it, or playing it, or reading it. Especially reading it. Similar to the Avatar sequel film, what also may have contributed to sales for The Last of Us Does was the lack of competition during this period. Like, you think this game was going to be outsold by the Switch version of Burnout Paradise Remastered? Or SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated a week later? Not to mention the game had insanely versatile accessibility features that allow even the most impaired player to experience the game's wholesome misery together. In spite of that, there were various attempts to downplay those sales, the most notable ones being an instance of this random JP Hi-Fi store in Australia stating that they wouldn't be accepting returns for the game, and this random Taiwan store offering it for free with the purchase of 3 other games. Ah, yes, tantalizing evidence, Sherlock. But did you also consider the slim possibility that fucking COVID was in its peak and the store didn't want any slimy ass swipes to return their games in person so as to prevent the spread of that horrible disease? Or that this random ass Taiwanese store maybe had too much stock of the game and decided to give it away for funsies? But sure, let this be the prime examples of how The Last of Us Part 2 was another innate failure of unseen proportions. Why else would there be a subreddit with tens of thousands of members dedicated to bashing the title? Like, even without taking into consideration those normal everyday people, endlessly talking about it online is only going to keep the game in the online zeitgeist. Probably more than it ever would have if the game had just been released under normal circumstances. I talked about this bullshit with fellow video creator, The Golden Bolt. And by talked about it, I mean asked him about it during his Patreon monthly Q&A, but seriously, we're friends. We've been in each other's videos for like 30 seconds total. I think that counts.
Who the f*** are you?
Shut the f*** up. Anyway, he made a very interesting observation during our various discussions revolving around the game's trophy data, which shows to date that over 50% of players who have this game in their library have completed the story. Sure, maybe that doesn't sound majorly impressive at first, but then you factor in the game's total sales again and how this is a 30+ hour game. That means there are millions and millions and millions of people playing this game to completion. But it's more interesting when you also consider that, and this may surprise you, a lot of people have this little tendency to not finish games. It's something to do with how they're a bit of a massive time investment, and a lot of games don't usually see every single one of its player base getting through to the credits, or however you define completion. Like, based on achievement data for some of these popular games going back years and years and years, the completion rates tend to be in the lower percentiles. So to see this game have a higher average completion rate than even some of the most popular games of previous years is noteworthy. Yes, it's not entirely concrete because this is on an account-by-account basis, but there are a lot of people who are still invested in this series, and 3 years down the line, that still seems to be the case, especially in the wake of all the new fans it's now received. Kinda goes against the prevalence that it was a failure, doesn't it? So let's put a pin in the discussion for all those initial events. I think we have established them pretty well by now. And yet, in spite of the last half hour of me saying all of this information, I still don't feel like anything more than just a witness. Like, maybe I could use this time to talk about my own thoughts about Part 2. Hell, I could talk about it for longer than this video has been going on. I could talk about how Ellie Lou is a terrible person. I could talk about how Abby Lou is a terrible person, and somehow more interesting. I could talk about the actual transgender character who I have a sneaking suspicion will end up being the next playable character in Part 3 whenever we get to that. I could talk about how once again the core appeal of this game for me is being able to explore these desolate post-apocalyptic cities and learning about all sorts of horrific side stories that the main characters just simply react to by going,
Jesus.
And I could also talk about how the game really is too fucking long, but I still don't think the place for going deeper into these thoughts is here. For the record though, I did enjoy both of these games quite a bit, enough that I've played through them twice now, and I understand why those who don't like them, but I want to save those thoughts and arguments for another time in the future. I don't know when. I've got at least 5 other ideas I want to work on first before ever thinking about this fucking franchise again, but one of these days, it'll happen. In the aftermath, the controversy did quiet down a considerable bit, insofar as it became a lot of white noise that's easily ignorable, but in terms of any new incidents, there were some. When the end of the year came around, the awards shenanigans started up, and The Last of Us Dast of Us won an expected 100-something Game of the Year awards from many publications. 300-something. Including Best Game Direction, Best Narrative, Best Audio Design, Best Innovative in Accessibility, Best Action Adventure, and Best Performance for Laura Bailey, as well as the big old overall Game of the Year award at the coveted The Game Awards, which is never short on controversy itself.
Hey, Matan. You know, real quick, I want to thank everybody and say that I think I want to nominate this award to my Reformed Orthodox Rabbi Bill Clinton. Thank you, everybody.
And that feat was great enough to stoke the fires once again. Alongside the expected claims that it was rigged and that Druckmann and Keeley were in bed together, and come on people, use your smooth brains for 1 fucking minute. Keeley only has room for one game's creator in his heart to endlessly shower with praise, and insinuating anyone else gets the same treatment is a catastrophically incorrect statement. Y'all keep watching this crap anyway, don't ya? And I know it ain't because of the awards.
Hey, Matan.
That spark didn't last too long though, and since then the most notable incidents I was able to scrounge up involved the person who Abby Lou had been modeled after seeing continued harassment and death threats as of this past February, because as we all know by now, Abby Lou is a real person who did real terrible things in the real actual world that affected people in a real tangible way, so everyone involved in her creation needs to suffer in a similarly real way. And then some strange conflict where a YouTube channel was accused of having its fans send death threats to a random Reddit user, and it turned out that that Redditor actually sent those threats to themselves and made up the whole thing in an attempt to defame them. What? So what else has Naughty Dog been up to since then? Well, they put out a PS5 upgrade for the game less than a year after its release. They posted a lot of art on their Twitter. They put out PS5 and PC versions of the PS4 Uncharted games. They did an interview where they indicated they're still working out the kinks to stop the whole crunch business from happening again, while also shrugging off the idea of unionization, which also isn't a very good look. Oh yeah, the PS5 remake. The Last of Us Part 1 saw an official announcement during last year's Jeff Keighley's sponsored Summer Games Fest, following an accidental listing on the PSN store and Jason Schreier's piece on its existence, which showed it had been in development since well before the second game's release. I learned about this myself a few months after finishing that second game, and I'm gonna be honest, it made me a little bit irritated. More so when the official announcement came along, and we learned it was going to be priced at the new premium value of $70. You couldn't get me to buy Returnal at that price. What makes you think I'm gonna buy this remake of a 9-year-old game that doesn't even have enough upgrades in my view to warrant said purchase?
Also, Sony moving it from the small internal dev team within their visual arts service group to Naughty Dog's doorstep, in spite of that group being more than capable to do so with Sony's support, which they seemingly refuse to provide, does not help matters either.
Regardless, sales of it were pretty decent, especially after the TV show premiered. And at the very, very, very least, this game's development reportedly didn't involve any crunch. Like, I sure as hell hope there wasn't. I would have been even more perturbed here since it's a goddamn remake, but thanks for letting us know, ND. That sounds like a good endpoint for them, too. Oh yeah, the PC port for that thing came out recently. Let's see how that's doing.
The lantern on Rich. He's not getting the specular transfer of light there.
What is
just
going
like
on?
You are getting it.
What is going on?
Both of us are getting it, but it's not over there. Like, what the heck? It's just gone.
I've said a lot about these games and their controversies. A lot of admittedly disorganized thoughts and feelings, with a bit of hesitancy in just writing the shit down on virtual paper. And yeah, I still feel like nothing more than a witness. That's another fallacy though, isn't it? Because you could say I've been nothing more than a witness to this crap all this time. Like, I ain't no journalist, I ain't no professional writer, or even a filmmaker. I'm just some guy with a YouTube channel of my very own regurgitating this shit based on secondhand accounts and throwing in cheap humor to make the dopamine hit. How could this be any tougher to craft than the last 69 plus videos? Nice. I don't know. I think coming into these games so late makes all these harsh reactions feel so alien. Which, you know, has its benefits, has its drawbacks, but trust me when I say I found it easier to write about fucking KZ Manager and Rapeplay than this trash. I do think I found a good takeaway from this peculiar experience, and that is, Much like how the original game was a cultural touch point for video games with how much acclaim it has received from critics and fans and the direction pretty much a lot of these games have been going in for so many years, The Last of Us Part 2 feels like a cultural touch point for how damaging a perfect storm of controversy can be with a single game. And again, without any of that ever happening, the reaction probably wouldn't have been as bad as it turned out to be. And it probably still would have sold just as much as it did too. I would call a lot of this shit worthless as a result, but it clearly has some worth. Now, that wouldn't be the exact same case during the next time we saw this kind of scenario after The Last of Us 2 came out, but that's a story for another decade. Well, actually, I am pretty sure just all humanity is dead in this timeline, so I don't even know who's going to be able to listen. I'm not even sure if anyone is listening right now, or even watching. I could be saying stuff like mothballs are good for your colon, or doing some crazy stunts, and y'all wouldn't even notice. Man, I'm unstoppable. Don't get the wrong impression, though. I may seem more lenient on Naughty Dog than I actually have been, but I do believe they screwed up badly by letting their crunch culture get so out of hand. Did they really deserve all the shit they got following Schreier's big report, though? The leaks suck. The continuous harassment and threats of life cancellation for various people sucks. And having all those bad faith arguments fester for so long that it taints any sort of conversation surrounding the topic at hand sucks the most. And anyone wanting to argue that, oh, it wasn't as big as it appeared to be and no one really cares about this stuff anymore, I would keep pointing at that subreddit. Let this be a reminder of just how insular this gaming community, really the internet at large, can be. And while I'm sure we will be seeing these discussions reinvigorated with the same stupid arguments once again as soon as they get around to adapting the story for the HBO show, even as a simple witness to it, I can confidently say that many of The Last of Us Part 2's controversies were overblown garbage. Hopefully whatever else Naughty Dog puts out in the future doesn't reach this same level of batshit scrutiny, but we'll just have to see. Or you could just make 5 more Abby posting memes. That joke definitely hasn't run its course. Oh, here's a better one. Let's use ChatGPT to make the dialogue in the game how it really should be.
I am sad. I am angry.
Man, oh, I never knew this could taste so good. Oh, yeah, being the lone survivor of a worldwide plague sure does have its benefits. No more people, no more Ohio, and no more game controversies. Especially the censorship-related ones. God, I hate talking about censorship. So many fucking weirdos care way too much about that crap. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty great. Pretty lively. Pretty comfortable. I can't wait to start this new chapter of my life. You think I'd be used to this by now, but I'm really not. Wait, is that? Oh no. Oh no! I thought she was dead!